Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today. Make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac and the podcast in the description below. Before the video starts, I have a quick message. I think for your mental health it's very important that you stay on top of your thoughts, because remember, some days you'll be pretty much stuck in your own head, and if you're not talking to yourself the right way or thinking the right things, you can suddenly start feeling very down and get stuck in a negative loop. I know it's hard to do and you can't always do it perfectly, but for me, if I can stay on top of them, it's a night and day difference. So just try and be conscious and aware of that, and try not to view things as failures or whatnot and reminisce on other times, because sometimes that can lead you to negative spiraling thinking, and it's something I think people should try and avoid. So I hope everyone's doing great and enjoys these stories. Take care. I'll speak to you all soon. When I was a theatre studies student in the Midlands of England, we had to take our little theatre company on tour around a local rural countryside as part of the practical side of our course. Being a proper London girl, I wasn't pleased about the prospect of roughing it in a 10-person van. I mean, there was 15 of us in this company, but for the sake of my art, I stopped being a city tart and threw myself with enthusiasm into it. One day, we broke down in the middle of nowhere, and by the time the AA guys got to us, and in turn by the time we got to the campsite, all of the spaces at the campsite are taken. We had 3 performances locally the next day. It had gone 8 PM and it was almost pitch black. We didn't have many options left open to us. Our director said it would be best if we drove the van into the forest and all sleep in the van for the night, as it was late and to continue driving would actually be dangerous, so to continue early in the morning. We reluctantly agreed. We found a quiet part of the forest that was open with not many trees, and by 9:30 we were settled into the van. We are all 19 or 20, and it's a big adventure. At around 11:30, I was stirred awake by one of my colleagues screaming and another bloke saying, "This is so bad, we're all screwed." Now, to my complete horror, through my blurred sleepy eyes, I saw that our little van was completely surrounded by about 15 men dressed in what appears to be farmers' clothes, with homemade torches all burning brightly. I started panicking, but don't scream. I can't take my eyes off of them. They're not moving an inch and don't have any facial expressions. 2 of the blokes even got out of the van and shouted at them. And nothing. We're all terrified. Every time we tried to move the van, the men would step forward. At 1:30, the men suddenly all turned around and walked away through the trees. We were absolutely knackered, too tired to drive anywhere else, so we took turns in keeping watch. Thankfully, the men never came back to us. Between my boyfriend and I, we have 2 large dogs. One's a 95-pound male German Shepherd and the other is an 80-pound Husky GSD mall mix. Because the 2 of them are really big and strong, I can't walk them at the same time. I rarely walk them alone, but on the off chance I do, I walk the GSD while the other stays back. A few weeks ago, I went on an early morning walk with GSD while my boyfriend was at work. It must have been around 10 AM. It was pretty bright outside, although a little cloudy and cold since Colorado weather is starting to get colder. I was walking through the little neighborhood towards a trail that we always take. It leads to an open space where we usually walk the dogs. We take this trail pretty frequently since the trail is right in the neighborhood. As we got to the area where the trail begins, GSD starts going crazy. He's usually incredibly well behaved on walks and has really good leash manners, but started barking and growling and jumping. I have no idea what he saw, and I couldn't see anything. I kept telling him it was okay and tried to calm him down, but then all of a sudden, the brush ahead suddenly moves as though a large animal is running through it. It makes me super nervous because I literally can't see anything. And I was alone, so we turned back and went to the house. I didn't think anything of it until a few days later. During the night a few days later, I hear something when we're trying to sleep. We played it off as the house settling, since the weather's getting colder, and I left it at that. The next day, there was a decapitated rabbit in the driveway up near the garage door and the front porch. The head was totally gone, and the body just laid there, and there was blood in the driveway. I can't say for certain, but I have the feeling that whatever animal it was come across us and followed us home. We haven't seen anything since then, but a few days ago, I noticed some fresh blood next to the spot that we hadn't been able to get out of the cement. I took a picture, and I began feeling nervous anytime I go outside or let the dogs out at night. What sort of animal would do that, leave it basically on our doorstep and follow us home? A little background about myself. I've worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods, over 15 years in total, with about 7 years of that being of the Park Service at Olympic National Park. Many years ago, I had an experience that would warrant the title of creepy. While working for the Park Service, one of my jobs was that of a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backcountry historical cabins, emergency shelters, homesteads, and chalets, tasked with repairing and restoring them to their original historic accurate states. This was a wonderful and demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd be flown in supplies, sometimes we'd use llamas or mullets to pack our gear. All the time sleeping in tiny walled single tents, cooking over a fire or a whisper-lit stove, using the same tools and techniques that the original homesteaders had at their disposal in the late 1800s to construct and survive in this unforgiving environment. One fall, I was assigned to work near Lake Ozette at an old homestead off the trail near the constructed boardwalk. For those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Ozette is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide. It sits as the largest, most unaltered natural lake in Washington. It has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Makah tribe center in Knee Bay, houses discovered found in the area dating back 2,000 years ago, along with a local village that was well preserved over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts intact. The trail loop, which was homestead directly adjacent to, is approximately 9.4 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through huge patches of chest-high solar, before delivering you to Old Somers Prairie about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Now, this is a giant soggy meadow which was formed once by 2 Swedish immigrants and farmed. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings on the 150-acre bog. With cattle, sheep, vegetable gardens, and the help of a little Swedish ingenuity, they managed to etch out lives for themselves here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decided to take back what was once its own. The now decades-long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable. Our job was to beat back the encroaching forest, put new windows in the main cabin, pipe in new stove, apply fresh paint, and fix up proportions of the semi-dilapidated barn. The ultimate goal being to allow guided tours to take place sometime in the future. For about 3 weeks, we stayed in the bunkhouse while working there. This was a good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under the rain, our beds were warm, and our hike was short, and the train was not difficult, and we had TV. The bunkhouse was actually located near the highway and the ranger station. We hiked the 5-mile loop every day, bringing us with boards, tools, paint, and everything else we needed. We have this on our back, and these are full 10-hour days, and we usually start our morning hike around 0700 and begin our return towards the bunkhouse around 1700. At one point during the fall, there were 4 of us working this project, but at the time of this event, there was only 2 of us remaining. Most of us had worked really hard and had finished the worst of it. We needed to hike the last few boards up to the prairie to complete a proportion of the wooded shed before we called the job done. I volunteered to pack mule for the day, my only job being carrying as many boards as I could muster in each trip to the prairie before returning to the ranger station with the next load. It was late in the season for hikers at this point. The weather had turned and we'd be lucky to see 2 or 3 people a day during the entire loop. After my 4th trip, I was pretty wiped. It was getting late in the evening now, around 1600, and my co-worker had decided to call it a day. I thought I could get one more trip in before it becomes too dark, my rationale being the more trips I did today, the less I have to do tomorrow. So we passed on the trail, and I told him my intentions and continue. I delivered the last boards of the day, and took a look around the prairie as the sun starts to set into the trees, and I start my hour hike back to the ranger tower. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point, the cedars blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun, making visibility quite diminished. I'm not a nervous hiker, and I fail to spook easily, having solo hiked for weeks on end in backcountry, but I've been stalked by cougars, confronted by Kodak bears, and even ran into a few demented hillbillies over the years. As I left the prairie in the evening though, the hair stood up on the back of my neck and my goosebumps erupted on my forearms. An uneasy feeling swept over me. Suddenly I wanted to walk faster or sprint. Instead, I convinced myself that I'd been reading too many fantasy novels before bedtime. I walked another 5 minutes or so before I started to hear something faint that sounds like music. Impossible, I told myself. I'm the only one out here, at least 2 miles away from civilization, and civilization in reality being likely the only other soul out there, my colleague. Sure enough, however, I hear music, more specifically a piano. It started out so faintly that I had to stop moving to actually hear it. The steps on the wooden boardwalk being loud enough, every single time that I paused, it becomes louder and more unmistakable. I stood there, sun now fully hidden behind the horizon in total silence other than the piano. I become aware that there were no longer the noises of life. No birds, no insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbrush. Absolutely nothing other than piano, as if everything was being weighed down by a fog of emptiness of sorts. I've encountered this dead time before in the woods. Certain places have it, but this was different now and somewhat unique to this place, unique to my moment. I tried to focus on the keys but can't recognize composition. Unsurprisingly, as I mostly listened to Metallica and Korn at the time. It was playing with a purpose. It was controlled in tune, thoughtful. It was a song, and somehow it felt meaningful for the moment, like it was made for it. I started walking again, almost on cue for the music to get louder. As my pace increased, so does the tempo of the keys, still in tune, never flattering. It reaches a climax, the perfect combination of my haste, my dread, my heartbeat, and the tempo of this. Then, as quickly as it comes, it stopped, whooshed away in a frantic moment. It didn't trail off, it didn't fade into extinction, it was just gone. Suddenly, everything that was absent was swept away as if by a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom, the stagnation, and the weight of everything is lifted. The next step on the boardwalk was once again in reality. The evening was just the absence of light as it felt like before. Somehow, was once again injected into the forest, and everything's normal. I didn't hear the piano again that night, nor ever. I told my coworker about what had happened and he showed no signs of disbelief. We talk about it years later, when something similar happened to another Park State Service employee. When I told my grandfather what happened, as he was a retired park ranger who worked nearby at the next station over, without hesitation he said, "Did you hear bagpipes with it, or just a piano?" It seems I've learnt and experienced since then that there's a lot more to this place than it seems. I grew up in a very small rural town in Michigan. This place was so small that everybody knew everyone. My high school graduation class consisted of less than 30 people. It was a place with a very small population, but geographically, it wasn't small at all, consisting mostly of wooded areas and open fields. Houses are spread out, and nothing like what you see in the city. The nearest city was hours away. I lived on a dead-end gravel road. My neighbour's at the very end of the road, and to my left, there's about a 5-minute walk before you meet the others. You could barely see the neighbour's house through the sparse trees. To the right is another neighbour. My uncle and aunt and my favourite cousin actually live about 5 minutes away. I could only see their house if I walked to the end of my driveway. My house was the second to last one on the road, and just before my house was a really long driveway. I suppose you could call it another road, but it led directly to a house behind mine that belonged to a man I'll call Dave. Now there's a large open field, followed by another sparse tree line, and Dave's house is behind that. I could easily see his small house perched on the top of a tiny hill in the distance. I loved growing up there. It was my favourite place in the world. My mum and dad worked in town, and my older brother, my younger sister and I were always left to our own devices growing up. We were always playing outside. My siblings and I are all born within the first half of the 90s, so we grew up during a time where there weren't really cell phones. We didn't have cable TV, just a few channels when we got an antenna. And our parents usually kicked us out of the house from sunrise to sunset because they didn't want us being stuck indoors. Because of this, we often explored the land around the area. Being 90s babies, our parents for some reason trusted us to literally wander everywhere. Never once did they check up on us. Now the house behind us was extremely creepy. We rarely saw anyone come or go, and believe me, they were very nosy and would know if somebody was driving down the road. The upstairs bedroom window overlooked the front of the house, and my sister upstairs' window overlooks the back of the house. We also had a giant set of sliding glass doors at the back of our house that opened up to the back door porch. They were so big it practically took up the whole wall, so we literally saw everything. Despite the neighbour behind us rarely being seen going anywhere or seeing anyone show up there, we just knew he was creepy. We used to call him Creepy Dave, and still do to this day, including my parents. I can't really explain why we started to call him that, but it seems so fitting. We used to walk through the field and along the tree line towards Dave's house. We were careful not to walk all the way up the driveway. We'd usually just play near the tree line and the fields around the area. The fields are owned by a local farm, family friends or my parents, so weren't exactly trespassing onto Dave's property if we stayed just far enough down. Sometimes we would get a little brave and creeped up the road more. I can remember inside the ditches leading up to his driveway, there would be animal bones, fully intact skeletons, even a deer skull. It had all been there long enough to be pure bone. That alone was creepy enough for young kids to see. When I was in middle school, Dave married this woman. I can't remember for the life of her name, but she had 2 children, a daughter I'll call Lisa and son I'll call Dustin. Now they started to ride the bus with me and my siblings to school. They always hated it when the bus drove up the eerie driveway to their house. I can remember one winter, the bus actually got stuck in the snow. The bus driver had to try and shovel us out, and while everyone was stuck waiting for the bus, I happened to look out the window at the barn near the house. It was still dark out, but just starting to turn to dawn, so the sky was bluish, but still dark, and you can see silhouettes. I kid you not, standing there on the second level of the barn, there's creepy Dave holding a pitchfork. He's not even doing anything, he's just staring at us watching. All I can see is his outline. It frightens me so much that I turn my whole body away from the window and start tearing up a bit. My best friend sitting next to me says what's wrong, and I can't even tell her. I don't know what it was, but it scared me so badly. I don't know if anybody else saw him up there, but I still picture it. That was the last time I actually saw Dave for myself, but unfortunately, he didn't disappear fully from our lives. I used to stay up late in middle school watching movies and reading. I've always been a night owl, and sometimes my sister and I would stay up on the weekends all night watching films. One night it's very late. After 3 AM, my sister had fallen asleep, but I was still awake. All of a sudden, we hear a very loud pounding coming from the door that led to our garage. We had a huge bay window in the living room, and a front door to the left of it. Our garage was on the right. Our window faces a driveway, and we have multiple dogs, so whoever this was come from behind the house, crept into our garage so the dogs don't know. I was so scared. My sister starts crying. I started screaming for my dad. He come running out of his bedroom in his underwear holding a shotgun. He went to the door, and it's Dave's wife, crying hysterically. I have no idea what happened, but my dad never even told me, and the cops show up. Over time, this happened a few more times. It got to the point where my sister and I stopped sleeping in the living room. And eventually one night, my dad told Dave's wife she needs to stop coming running to our home for help and needed to go to the other neighbours. Thinking back, I feel bad, but my dad was clearly worried about us. These occurrences stopped for a while until one morning, I walked downstairs to SWAT vans parked around the road, men in uniforms with vests and guns crouching in the backyards, and they're pointing directly towards Dave's house. I freaked out. I ran into the living room, into the front entrance, and my dad was standing there with a sheriff. The sheriff had been telling my dad that during the night, Dave held his wife and daughter at gunpoint. I'm not sure where her son was, but he hadn't been there. Eventually, this man in his drunken fit of rage blacked out and passed out, and the wife and daughter escaped. I'm still not sure which neighbour they went to, but the cops are called. Upon getting there, he actually shot at them, and that's when the SWAT was called in. I suppose sneaking through my yard across the field was their way to get an element of surprise, but hell, how is a young girl supposed to know what to do when all this is going on? Dave went to prison, and I have no idea of the outcome, nor his family. The kids never went back to school. Apparently he's out now but never come back here. All I know is his creepy house is still there, and it's been abandoned for ages. This was a few years ago during my freshman year of college. A couple weeks into school, this girl I had class with asked me if I wanted to go to a concert. She'd been given 2 tickets as a gift, and still being early in the school year, I didn't really have friends, nor did she, so we decided to go. We live in a large city, and the concert was in a small town about an hour away by train. We get to know each other on the way there, and by the time we get off the train, it's very dark. The street lamps are sparse. We're dressed in our outfits for the concert, and the venue's about a 10-minute walk away. Neither of us had ever been out of town before, and we're having some trouble using Google Maps to figure out what direction to head in. I, generally being pretty wary of strangers, am content to continue struggling with my phone map. However, my new friend decides to ask a man on the street for help. He looks like he's in his 30s, about 6 feet tall, blonde, and he's wearing a suit with no tie, and the top couple of buttons are undone. He tells us he knows where the venue is and can get us there. He says, do we want to walk? Now he says what are our names and how old are we, and where are we from. Not necessarily creepy, but I'm getting a bad vibe. It's dark. The streets become practically empty from the train station. We end up reaching an intersection, and he starts to turn right. I'd continued to look on Google Maps once we started walking, and having become better orientated, we're now moving. I know that we need to take a left. I say this, but he says, nah, you're wrong. And I say I'm looking at the map, but he says it must have gotten confused. We turn left and he continues walking with us, assuring us that now he knows where he's going. The map says a concert's up ahead, and in the distance, I can see people all heading in the same direction. Again, our guide says that this is wrong, and he starts walking into a very secluded area near the woods. My friend is starting to get worried, and looks very superstitious. I'm gonna leave that in. My friend has also become suspicious, and we tell him that we're gonna continue straight. He insists that the venue is through the parking lot, and when we point out to the people up ahead, he says it's a shortcut, it's much quicker. We thank him for his help and keep walking. As we leave him, he stands there in the parking lot yelling, "You guys are gonna get lost. You need help." Luckily, he didn't follow us and stopped yelling once we got closer to the crowd. We got to the venue soon after, had a great time at the concert, and I'm scared he'd be waiting for us. Luckily, he never found us again. I'm positive if we went into the woods, something very bad would have happened. My family and I have been hunting on the same property in East Texas for over 10 years. I love Texas. And we've had some really creepy encounters with some of the locals. This property we hunt on is timber company land. It's way off the beaten path down some dirty roads. No power, no running water, no sewer. There's only a few people that live in the area, only scattered around some hunting camps. Our closest neighbours live in a trailer about a mile away, and we've come to call this a meth house. Now I'm not sure if it's really a meth house, but it wouldn't be hard to believe that was happening there. Now this place has always been odd. There is a trailer sitting in the middle of a pine clearing. The brush is fairly overgrown around the trailer, almost as if the property is abandoned. There have always been broken down cars and other junks grown around the front. Cow skulls and hip bones are attached to a pine tree going off about 20 feet. It started out maybe 10, and over the 10 years has grown out to about 20. Now for a long time, the strangest thing about that place is a vibe you get. In 2017, things get weirder. The front yard collection began to grow. A rotted out taxidermy of wild hogs was added to the skull tree. A doll's head was fixed with horns onto some kind of stick in the ground, which we called the devil baby. There's 3 tripods about 12 feet high, each erected around the trailer made out of pine trunks. One day when we drove by, we noticed that from one of these tripods hung the spinal column and rib cage of we don't know what. We thought originally they were using the tripods to hang and clear deer, but the same bones have been hung there for over a year now, and someone would usually get rid of this. So, we've had no encounters with the residents and don't even know what they look like or if they actually lived there long term. This place was creepy. They seemed to keep to themselves. Until later in that season we had 2 creepy encounters. The first happened to my good friend. He had made a quick day trip with his wife up to the property to fill feeders and ride 4-wheelers. To get to the spot, he has to get on the dirt road and drive past the meth house. His spot is only a few hundred yards away from the house, While they were doing their thing, they began to hear some strange noises, and as he listened closer, he could hear high-pitched gibberish between three voices yelling weird words in Arabic and with Jesus mixed in. They decided to get on the four-wheeler and investigate. They found two men squatted down besides a large mud pile in front of the house. They were splashing and bouncing around while furiously speaking gibberish. Once they noticed the four-wheeler, they stopped and stared like animals. My buddy quickly took off. The second encounter happened to me and my brother. We were up there alone for the weekend, and were relaxing by the fire on a pitch-black night after a long day's hunt. We began to hear something strange in the distance. It was pipe organ music. It wasn't a recording of a pipe organ, but somebody actually playing one. They were missing notes and sporadically starting and stopping. We laughed about how it was like something out of a horror film, but the music continues for hours. Then all of a sudden, we hear crashing through the brush. Now we're actually in a very thick area of brush. It is between our camp and the direction of our house. This doesn't sound like the usual spooked deer or armadillo roaming around, or hogs even. It's made by something very large. Now the rest of the night it's quiet, and there's no more organ music, and we don't know what caused this. Now not too much has happened since then, but we've made a point never to go there alone, but to maybe one day scout it out overnight. The summer before second grade, my family and I moved into Olympia, WA. I with my parents and my older sister back then. My sister is 2 years older than me, so she would have been in the 4th grade. My sister celebrated her 10th birthday that same year by having a handful of friends over for a sleepover. We owned a trampoline back then and often had sleepovers and used the trampoline during the summer months. We lived near a forest. Now we have many fond memories of sleeping on the trampoline under the stars, but this was not one of those fond memories. Seeing as it was my sister's party, I was younger, and the annoying brother am not invited to the trampoline party. I do, however, remember how the events unfolded. It all began when around 6 or so girls came fleeing inside screaming about a man in the woods. Our backyard at this house was fenced off to the left and right side, but was not fenced on the backside as our backyard continued into a beautiful forest backdrop. According to the girls, as they're out on the trampoline enjoying their sleepover, a man in a yellow rain jacket appeared in the woods. The random creepy man proceeded to stand there in the woods and stare at the 6, 10-year-old girls the whole time they're out there. He didn't respond to them when they attempted addressing him or even break eye contact. It was at this point that the girls were so scared they collectively ran as fast as they could inside. After the girls relayed their experience to my parents and I, the 3 of us reached to the window to see this man. When we get to the window, all we can see is a glimpse of the yellow jacket as he disappeared further into the forest, beyond the borderline of the neighbouring fence, out of sight. My dad sprinted outside yelling at the man, threatening him, calling the police but we can't see him. My parents did call the police and filed a report, but nothing ever come of it. After this experience, our parents thought twice about letting us sleep on the trampoline at night. We ended up moving a year later. When I was quite young, maybe 9 or 10, my mum, sister, who's about 4 or 5, and I went for a walk in the forest. It was a large forest, well known for camping and having picnics, and we had walked through there many times before. The 3 of us walked for quite some time until we found a spot to have a picnic. After eating our food, we explored the various mushrooms and trees dotted around the place. When it started to roll over into late afternoon, we decided it was time to head back, and we made the walk back to the forest. There was always an eerie feeling when you're in the forest, in any forest no matter where. When we arrived back, we're shocked to see police cars everywhere and hear sirens. We had no idea what happened, but nevertheless, we got back into our car and drove home. I was wondering what could have happened the entire night back, when finally, my questions are answered. My mum and I sat down to watch the 7 o'clock news and found out that while we're having a picnic, the police had discovered a body buried in a shallow grave in that very forest. The reporter explained that the men involved were doing stuff with drugs and other criminal activities. As I was quite young when all this occurred, I didn't think much of it. Sure, I was creeped out, but I didn't completely understand it. Looking back now, it gives me chills thinking about it. I often wonder what would have happened if we were the ones to discover the body. Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend Dee and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we fully set up, the sun had set and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We're both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file with a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decide to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself, and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask or anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now an important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory, every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds, Jesus. just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful of his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard, so they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight, lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before. This I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get off on its two legs, just staring at us. Now I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad, I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me, they're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating, and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. Now as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the south. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a team was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but 'tis a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but there really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously at around 3 AM in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly, so I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black, everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out and the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation that I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. There's not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch him for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was, because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they've spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone, and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tap my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me, and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened, and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck, and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, They're more scared of you than you're of them, crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way, and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rearview mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now, he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, That small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already come in full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the 2 main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again, and he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of 2 of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the Reverend started, we could see our minds going to Chainsaw Killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail and it was dark. Now, we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now, we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep talking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him, like he's looking at me but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, are we armed? And we say, yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit. He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, that's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me. And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's going to be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I should start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, I don't think that's a park ranger. I say, what? You're kidding me? He says, no, just run. And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger. I said, "How'd you know? He's just wearing a coat." He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remembered turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police are still out there looking for it today. This happened a couple of years ago while I was still in high school and live feed cameras were becoming a thing. Must have been 2014. I used to go running in the woods right by my house in upstate Washington. The trail began very steep, almost like a hike, and then became steadily more flat as it went along, and that's where I began my runs. I would run every day through the same area in the morning around dawn and afternoon before and after school. I was running before school one morning and I can see a man with a plain tan hat very close to me sitting on the bench at the beginning of the trail. I hate detailing with people because I was an awkward teenager, so I look at the ground and walk by. As I get closer, I can tell he's staring at me. I walked past him as I was going up the trail, and I slightly turned around and saw he stood up, walking the trail behind me. Keep in mind, the sun is barely coming up, so it's still mostly dark. Then I ran. Now this isn't my normal jog, I was sprinting. Nobody's ever on this trail in the morning. I've never come across this guy before, and for some reason it creeps me out. I knew I could go through the forest basically to my backyard, so I wasn't worried, but definitely afraid he's going to attack me or something. As I go further down the trail, I lose him, so I slowed down because frankly, I'm out of breath. Then I heard a man's voice say loudly as if he was screaming, "Well, aren't you going to introduce yourself?" That's when I lost it. I called my mum and told her that I thought somebody's following me on the trail. I told her a brief version of what happened, and she told me that she could meet me with the car at the head of the trail, just in case a man's following me. She didn't want him to know where we lived. I went down a side trail that shortcuts to the head of the trail, and was looking out for the man the entire time. I got to my mum's car and started sobbing and crying. I don't really remember why. I just remembered being so scared that I was about to be kidnapped. The rest of my day went normally. I went to school and all my classes like normal, forgetting what happened. The rest of the week was pretty normal until Friday. Right on my way home from school, I stopped at the grocery store, and on my way out, I swore I saw the man. I thought I was imagining it, so walked to my car and drove home. I didn't do much on the weekends. I stayed home and chilled with my family, smoked with my friends, and that was about it. I was up late with my friend Josh watching bad movie after bad movie. Then we start hearing something around 3 AM. I had some annoying middle school kids in my neighborhood who are always doing pranks, so we ignore it. The knocking then transferred from the back room we're in to the windows by the front door. In the morning, I told my parents that my dad checks the ring camera. It was a man. There were multitudes of clips of him. First a couple of him walking past the camera as though he's going back and forth in front of the house to see if he can get in. Then a couple of clips of him stepping back and looking up as if he's trying to get into the upstairs windows from afar. These clips ended around 1:45 in the morning. Then around 3:05 he shows up again tapping on the windows and we could see him in the camera. At one point, he stood back and realised the cameras are there and just stares into it. He did this a few times, and then at one point gets really close to the camera and whispers, "How was your run?" Smiles and turns away. My dad called the police and had them come to the house. He showed them the camera footage, but since we don't have cameras in our house or at the back, we can't even prove that he's freaking trespassing. I never saw him again. When the police checked back in the following month, they said they were sure that he saw the camera and got scared and that I shouldn't worry about anything. It was just horrifying though. I don't know what he was planning on doing, but the fact I was being stalked is what terrifies me. I'm a guy, so something like this has never happened to me since, or before this. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time living with my grandparents. I like living with my mum and dad, but I can never resist going round there. They always made the best food for me, they had a really cool bedroom that I could hang out in, and I just really liked the vibe. There's also a really nice wooded area next to where I live. I love going there on my own. I really enjoyed it. I would even go out there at night sometimes with a flashlight. Of course I was always cautious and back by about 10 before nightfall, but I didn't always keep up the end of the promise to my grandparents, and one day that affected me in a really weird way. So it was one summer's evening. I was out later than normal because it stays dark for a lot longer. As I'm outside, I have a strange feeling that I'm being watched. Now I've only been out for a few hours, but I just can't shake the feeling. I'm not really doing too much, just having a venture through the wooded area. It suddenly hits me that there's a strange humming sound coming from near where I am. Now this makes me completely forget about the feeling of being watched. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It almost sounds metallic, but like it's biological at the same time. It's really hard to describe and I can't even replicate it. This makes me stop dead in my tracks. For some reason I look up towards the sky, and I notice stars everywhere. I was so caught up in my paranoia that I didn't even take a second to appreciate the beauty of this. As I'm doing so, I realise that my watch light has come on. It gives off a green glow in the dark. But then I look down, I don't even have my watch on. I wonder if there's something on my arm because it's glowing green. My heart then drops as I realise that all around me is glowing green. Now the next few seconds are a blur, but I look up and all I can see is a very bright light directly above me. It's blinding me, and a strange warm sensation. I cover my eyes and the next thing I know, I'm being woken up by emergency services, with my grandpa looking very scared over me. I spent the next few weeks in hospital, and apparently I'd been out in those woods alone for 3 days. Nobody was able to find me, and a massive search party went out to look for me. Strangely, there were lots of burnt plants and trees in the area where they found me. They thought I got kidnapped, and nobody could believe what I was telling them that happened. The only verification was that other people in the area also reported seeing strange lights in the sky that night. I'll probably never have an explanation for what happened. I mean, it could have just been my imagination, but it seemed too real. And it's crazy that other people reported seeing lights in the area where they found me, and that parts of the landscape were burnt around me, yet I was fine. This event happened about 3 years ago during mid-July. I live in Montana, outside of a rural community with a population of about 2,000. During this time, I live in a small one-floor ranch, home by myself. My nearest neighbours lived 1 mile away and was a farmer. I never had many strange encounters leading up to this one, but the woods by my house always had an ominous feel to it. Soon after moving in, I realized why the previous owners left quickly. I start hearing strange noises in the woods. They weren't just any noises. It sounded like blood-curdling screams and growls. After some research, I learned that even something like a bobcat can't really make these unnatural noises, but I don't think much of it. It never felt right though. It's hard to explain, but I never felt like this before, and it was just something about the woods around my house that made me feel uncomfortable, like I'm being watched. The first experience I couldn't explain happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. There was a thunderstorm, and the thunder was loud enough to keep me awake. I never did feel comfortable sleeping in storms alone. The lightning was crazy and would light up the whole surrounding area for a fraction of a second. I was laying on the couch and go up to get a glass of water at the sink. It's about 2 AM if I recall correctly. Above it, there's a small window that gives a view of my yard leading up to the tree line. When the next flash of lightning hits, I see it. Admittedly, it wasn't a long view, but enough for me to see whatever this thing is. It was near the tree line, just a few steps into my yard. At first, I thought it was a bear. It's not a bear. It was standing on 2 legs, with its face pointed towards a house. Its legs are like that of a dog's. I can really clearly make out the hocks. It was hard to tell the colour of the fur because of the darkness. Its upper body is massive, with a wide torso, and arms that can almost reach the ground from standing. The strangest thing is how the upper body seemed to dwarf the lower body. After standing there, frozen in shock, I waited for the next lightning strike, but when it happened, it's not there. It happened so quickly and was soon gone. After it, I bought a gun and wouldn't sleep without it within my arm's reach. The next encounter is what I consider the most frightening of my entire life. For several weeks, nothing really happened. I don't get cable where I live, and one night I was watching something and my satellite kept acting up. I didn't like going outside at night, but because this is going to be quick, all I had to do is move the antenna. I did so. Nothing bad really happens for a good few weeks now, so I decided to go out to it. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and went out. The first thing I noticed was the eeriness around me. This time of year, the woods are active with all kinds of creatures, not tonight. Despite the fear I was developing, I made my way over to the satellite and began adjusting it. I then heard a small snap of a stick and quickly turned to my left and shined my light towards the direction of the noise. What I saw horrified me for the rest of my life. I was immediately met with blood-red eyes. They're the colour of blood and truly are evil. The head of the thing looks like a mutated German Shepherd. I don't know what to say. It looks like a werewolf. A long snout and ears. The fur's black and shaggy. I could see the creature's very muscular body. It looks massive. It's definitely not a bear or a mutation of one. It was half in and half out of the woods, almost crouching as it came up to my head at 6 foot. Fully standing, this thing must have been 8 foot. I was about 20 feet from this thing. I didn't even consider my gun. The chances in hindsight are that the little .223 would have just bounced off it or something while I got tore to shreds. I back away slowly, never breaking eye contact. Gently, I pick up my gun and my fight or flight kicks in. I chose flight. Maybe not the best option, but even if I stayed there, that thing would have killed me. I ran the fastest I've ever ran in my life and don't turn back once. I have no idea if that thing's pursuing me. I got back in the house, locked every door and window, covered the blinds and sat with my back against the wall, cradling the gun the entire night. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I didn't for the following days either. I don't live there anymore now. People often speak of Sasquatches being these weird natural creatures living with the ecosystem, Sure, if you see one it might be scary, but it's probably more in awe than anything. With this thing though, it's totally different. It felt unnatural, evil, sinister. It was stalking me, toying with me, and I believe it would have killed me. I have never seen nor experienced this feeling again in my life. It's a memory I'm trying to put past me, but I still get nightmares about it. I think about it until the day that I'm gonna die, and I'll never forget this. My dad told me about this incident that happened in the early 50s when he was a young child. It was in the early 50s. My dad couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6 years old when it happened. He grew up on a large farm that was very isolated. The nearest neighbour was actually at least 1/4 of a mile away through rolling wooded hills. There was no electricity or service on the farm back then. They didn't get phones until the summer of 1984, so they're effectively on their own. Now one day, Grandpa had sent my uncle up to the feed mill to collect payment for the year's harvest. He was told to get in cash. Grandpa wanted to pay that year's taxes and deposit the rest in the bank. My uncle brought home the money. Now on that particular night, at around 2 a.m, they're awakened by a car parked on the property with its headlights aimed at the house. My grandpa rolled out of bed and crawled along the floor to my uncle and dad's bedroom and woke up my uncle. In almost complete darkness, they ran down the stairs. My uncle ran out of the back door and grandpa out of the front. My grandpa threw the door open and ran outside so fast he pretty much leapt over the back steps to confront the guy. The driver of the car was almost out of the way of the house. He saw my grandpa come in and my uncle close behind. He turned and hauled out of there. He made it into his car and he was trying to drive away, and my grandpa was grabbing the steering wheel trying to stop him. He managed to break loose and my grandpa chased him a short distance down the road, but he finally got away. At that point, my grandpa and my uncle noticed a second car at the end of the block speeding away. The intruders managed to get away for the night. Thankfully no one's hurt. The next day, my grandpa and uncle reported what happened to the sheriff, and they said if it happens again, do what you have to do to defend yourself. The next stop they made was to the hardware store to buy rifles, one for each of them. There was never a repeat of the incident, as my dad knows. That was an epilogue. That was at least 60 years ago. It was more than 30 years before I was born, and despite that, it's done more to form my views of self-resilience and home defense. More importantly than any Supreme Court cases stating the police have no duty to protect individuals. Now life has taught me that you often have to defend yourself, and the people who don't are usually the ones that end up not here. Okay, so this doesn't exactly keep me up at night, but was definitely something really terrifying when it happened. I got my first job in sophomore year of high school. My birthday is August 27, so I'm always either too young or too old. The importance of this story is, my mum and I don't get along. She is a person that picked me up before and after work. But one night, I was mad at her for something, so I walk home alone. I'm like a really small person, and I always look younger than I am, apparently. I'm 5'5", and get told all the time that I look like I'm still in high school, and this is me at 22. Anyway, at the time, I work at a grocery store which is like half a mile away from home. Creepy story. I walk home at 10 PM. I know the route obviously well. Everything was fine until I get to the neighbourhood. There's a swim school for little kids right by me. Literally, the only business in my neighbourhood. This is important because on my walking trip, I chose to cut through the parking lot. I noticed a guy was walking maybe 100 feet away from me. I wasn't worried at all, so I cut through the parking lot and head through the wooded trees. And then I keep walking. I then look back behind me, and I notice the guy is still there. My brain, I went into fight or flight mode. This is because I knew I'd cut a corner, so he shouldn't be there. His arms were moving swiftly, and clearly he was coming at me with intent. I book it to my house, and I can hear him chasing behind me. The guy was big, even from far away. He looked over 250 pounds. I luckily made it back home alright, but I hate to think what would have happened if I didn't know the area, and if he caught up to me. In 2017, I was walking my fiance's dog around our apartment complex. It was pretty dark and pretty creepy on a good day at night, but this day it's just off. Something really didn't feel right, and I noticed a car slowly creeping down the way next to me. My gut dropped, and something in my said head run. So I did so. I got out of sight of the car and see it slowly crawl up onto the area next to me and speed up and drive off, scanning for me. Under normal circumstances, I would say it was paranoia. It wasn't a normal time. I live in Tampa, and at our time, our city was on edge because a new serial killer just popped up and already killed 4 people. His MO seemed to be killing random people in the early evening or morning by shooting them, driving by. Even though they're all in one area, the police had the part of the city locked down, assuming that he started in another area. Literally a few days after this, the police got the guy, and it turned out he lived right down the street from me. I'm glad I trusted my gut because I'm pretty convinced I would have been his 5th victim. In May of 2015, some of my friends and I decided to go camping in the mountain rest SC. We left a little later in the day than we had wanted to do, so when we got to the road that cut into the mountains, it's already dark. While driving down the road, you can see other campsites because of the fires, but they're literally miles away from each other. We finally find one that nobody's at and pull up to it. The campsite is on top of a hill, and there was no room for our cars to be up there. We start to grab all the equipment off the cars and start to head up the hill to get set for the night. One of my friends and I start to look around for a good place to set up our hammocks, since it's what we chose to sleep in, and stumble across something that we wouldn't have seen in daylight, but completely missed because of the darkness. It was a large tree that had been cut down, as if to block vehicles going further in one direction. On the other side is a cemetery. It's unsettling at first on its own, because we're in the middle of nowhere in Southern Carolina, but even worse, we find out it's a mixture of Native American graves and Confederate soldier ones. This made for 2 interesting nights of camping. Each night, we would hear footsteps around our campsite, and there were no raccoons or anything around us. We then heard what sounded like a group of people talking, which is weird because nobody's around us. I was very confused by this and look up at the cemetery, and I see a group of shadowy figures. I was very scared and eventually went back to sleep. I never experienced anything like this since. I've had run-ins with cougars and an old farmhouse we lived in at for a while. You could always tell because the nightlife would go silent, the bats would vanish, the foxes would be quiet, even the tree frogs and crickets would go quiet. It started with nearby cows going out, then it was like a blob of audible darkness as everything hid from the massive cat. Now here's a creepier one. The same thing happens when big feral hogs are wandering at night. Same place. We let our dogs run loose at night for exercise. Sometimes they come home with a raccoon or armadillo. This one particular night, they come inside. Now my dogs fear nothing, because they are dumb. So when they ran from something, I knew to grab my gun. So with my wife behind me and the dog scouting ahead, I head for the nearest fence where the dogs are barking like towards the general direction of trees. Now, I see something stuck under the chain link fence. It's a pig squatch. It was the size of a bass boat. It grunted and my dogs took off immediately. I told my wife to head for the house and I'd be there as soon as the hog had uprooted and got past the posts. It was looking at me like I was ham. I back away one step at a time. If I tripped, he would have eaten me. When I got to the porch, my wife had my shotgun ready. I told her keep it and I go for my M1A. I know what you're thinking, right? But luckily by the time I got back, the pig was gone. The next day I went to look at the damages and I couldn't believe how much was actually done. I'm just so glad I got out of there without having to shoot that thing or it killing me. This happened to me a few days ago. I was at Eden Mill Nature Center in Maryland walking my dog. It was just before sunset, so the park was completely abandoned. No one car in the lot. This place has a few miles of hiking trails that's going through thick woods. On the first mile or so of the trail, you come onto a bridge that crosses a river. I have walked my dog here before, but for some reason, once we got on the bridge, my dog would not proceed to go across. He is a little dog, but has a very loud bark. Now at this point in time, he wasn't barking though. I was just standing still, staring across the 20-foot bridge. I went with my dog, and proceed to wait and watch into the forest across the bridge, with my hand on my pocket knife. Finally, after a minute or two, a gator, being a small farm vehicle, comes across the bridge. The guy, or whoever it was, looks at me and the dog real quick, then backs up to the hill. It was definitely weird. I turned back quickly towards my car. The fact that the dog would not move across the bridge makes me think something was really off with the situation. If you know Eden Mill Park, then you know that after the bridge is a long pathway completely covered in dark trees. If my dog didn't stop me, I would have been halfway down the trail, alone with that guy behind me blocking the trail. It may have been nothing, but the fact that my dog behaved that way makes me think differently. He's never done that before. It really changed my view on dogs. They really seem to detect things that aren't right. This story is short, but it scared the life out of me, because I haven't had anyone do anything like this to me before. So I was excited about a football game with my mum. My dad and my little sister are ahead. My dad was walking a little fast because he was mad at me and my mum for something that doesn't matter. I noticed this guy had walked out of the crowd and started following me and my mum. He picked up the pace a little and walked kinda next to my mum, a little ahead. He was staring in our direction, looking us up and down. He looked like a college student. He had bags under his eyes and black messy hair and was very pale. I gave him a side eye, as in, can you stop staring at me? He then suddenly fixes his gaze on me, making direct eye contact. I was super creeped out, clutching my bag and my mum's hand even tighter. He wouldn't stop staring at me after that. I forgot what made him turn around. I think I yelled to my dad, "Dad, wait up," and the guy realizes we're not alone. He does a complete 180, turns around back to where he originally come from. When we finally catch up to my dad, I literally burst out crying. The guy freaked me out so bad. My mum told my dad she thought he was going to try and rob us, and my dad stays closed after that. My mum said if the guy was looking at me or the girls behind us. I said I knew it was us because I made direct eye contact with him. I have somewhat of a strange one. I went hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail a number of years ago. It wasn't the whole trail, but a 20-mile section of it. I'm with around 10 or 11 people, and we're very new to hiking except for the leader. I signed up through high school, and it was an extracurricular to hike somewhere. Anyway, about halfway through the hike, we see a beautiful lake at the foot of a mountain, about half a mile off the trail. It was gonna get dark in about an hour and a half, and there seemed to be some good spots to set up camp right next to the lake. We decided to go for it and set up. The north end of the lake led straight into a small mountain with a little white cap, and just to the south sat a cluster of boulders, about the size of a dump truck. The boulders were easy enough to climb, and provided a nice place to chill that was just far enough away from the lake that the mosquitoes are not absolutely over the top. As the stars began to shine and the sun set, I lay atop of the boulders staring into the sky looking for shooting stars. There were 2 other kids on the boulder with me, just chatting back and forth. I wasn't paying attention to what they're saying because the stars were so bright it was beautiful to watch. Then suddenly, a greenish glowing lion creature appeared in the sky, just like it morphed into reality. I was completely awe-stricken and didn't really believe what I was seeing. This creature looked like it was further away from where planes fly, yet large enough for me to tell that it looked similar to a lion. It stayed in the sky for about 5 seconds before vanishing without making a sound, and it didn't acknowledge my existence whatsoever. What's crazy is the other 2 kids saw it too. At first I never spoke to anyone about the experience, but the more times went on, the more strange I think it is. My dog and I heard a really spooky noise this morning from around 6 AM. It's very foggy out, and she didn't want to go outside, so I coaxed her out with treats, and her fur was all puffed up, and she was shaking and went back inside. I wonder why she's so afraid, so I pick her up and carry her into the yard. She froze in place, shaking with her tail between her legs. Then I heard this really strange sound coming from the front lawn near the woods. It was a creepy bird noise, but also not quite like a bird, like when somebody blows a blade of grass making that shrill sound, or a Zippo lighter. I've never been so petrified in my life. I told my dog let's go inside, and we both rushed inside up the stairs. She was shaking. I got into the room, and I'm crying. Just silent tears though. I was so afraid. I've never experienced this before. It wasn't like any animal I've heard before or even found online. I seriously hope it's an animal, but I live in upstate New York, right near northern PA. It's 12:30 now, and I'm trying to fall asleep, but I'm too scared to. A few years ago, my dad was getting ready to go back to bed, and the family dog kept barking and growling at him. My dad thought the dog wanted to play with him, and so tried taking him outside in the backyard for a few minutes, but the dog wouldn't leave his side. Whenever my dad would turn away from him, he kept growling at him and barking almost like he's about to attack him. So my dad got concerned and asked my mum if she noticed the dog's behaviour. My mum kept trying to figure out what was wrong with the dog, and when my dad suddenly fell and passed out, my mum called 911, and they told her that my dad was having a heart attack. My dad was stabilised in the hospital and recovering well, but then, one other night, the dog started barking and growling at my dad again. They took him to the doctors and sure enough, he was having another heart attack. They were able to treat him and discharge him from the hospital 2 days later. Dogs definitely know when something is wrong and can really be life-saving. One night, 4 friends and myself decided to explore a large, supposedly haunted park that led to an abandoned neighbourhood that would be in an addition to the park, creating longer biking/running trails. We had hid out in this park till about midnight because the place closes at 10 and the park rangers scout the entire area. In order to get where we had to, we need to use our bikes and flashlights. So after waiting for a while, we took off. I had a large and very bright flashlight, so I rode close behind everyone else, mainly because my girlfriend at the time, let's call her S, wasn't an excellent bike rider and she's falling behind. We went far into this park down a trail until it ended. We had to get off our bikes and walk until we hit an abandoned road that's soon to be turned into a new road. We reached the abandoned neighbourhood, and it's just as creepy as we think it's gonna be. It was 1 AM, and being an eerie street with greenery growing everywhere gives a really creepy vibe to the place. Now we take some pictures of the area, and after failing to really see anything worth noticing, we turn our backs to it and return. Now on the way back, there's a bridge that we cross that's not completely finished. There was a wide opening to go down under the bridge and a curb to hop on because it wasn't paved onto the abandoned road yet. So my girlfriend did not see the curb to hop on it and hit it, stumbling off her bike. I was behind her holding the flashlight and almost fell off myself, but I caught myself in the end, and I shined the light straight down to the bottom of the bridge. Suddenly, I see an extremely pale girl with red hair wearing a dirtied white dress, sprinting under the bridge. However, I only get to look at her side. "No way!" was the next thing I heard S yelling on her bike on the other side of the ridge. She was pretty frantic, but I wanted to make sure that whatever she had seen matched what I had, and she described it perfectly to what I saw. I thought maybe it was some girl in trouble and that maybe we should check it out, but she grabbed my arm and said we need to get out of here. When she saw where I shined the flashlight, she was able to see her face, and apparently, she had blank white eyes and she was staring straight back at her. We still have no idea what we saw to this day. About a year ago, I was living with my mates. I stayed in a ground floor flat that kind of sits in a cul-de-sac and is a bit of a pain to walk to, kind of detached from the community. The only times I felt completely secure are during sunlight, depending on the time of year. The block of flats sits kind of in an L shape. Our entrance sits kind of on the side of a 90-degree angle. Inside the main building, there's a flat either side and stairs in front. The immediate entrance to the hall is very dark. It really feels like the lights choose when not to work. The flats are very basic: a hallway, 2 small double doors, a bathroom, decent living room and a small kitchen. The hallway is quite long and the living room is at the end of it. Both bedrooms face each other, so we can walk from our doorways, if that makes sense. Now we live near a forest and it's about 11/11:30 at night, and my flatmate was in her room, presumably asleep. She had a habit of leaving things unlocked and I had to make sure everything is locked up before I head off to sleep. But she'd gotten better and normally at least had the chain on the door. If it wasn't locked, she always goes to bed early, so it's weird. I was in the living room and decided to grab a pint of water before heading to bed myself. I went into the kitchen, which is attached into the living room, switching on the kitchen light and filling up a glass. The car park in front of the flat is also very dark. I remembered feeling eerie. I don't know why, I just sometimes get a feeling that something is off, kind of like the feeling that I'm being watched. Anyway, I had a couple of sips and filled the glass a little more and had to go back out the kitchen when the front doorbell went. I froze. I didn't even know we had a doorbell. About 10 seconds passed before the letterbox was hit twice and my stomach sank. I felt trapped in the kitchen. Now some important notes. If you step out of the kitchen, it puts you into the perfect line with the hallway. That's if the living room doors are open, which it was. 2. Our front door had a bloody window so you can see the silhouettes of anyone outside or in. I grabbed my phone and called my mate who was in her room, right next to the front door. We both whispered to each other, "Did you hear that?" Both thinking we'd misheard it. We had to whisper because the walls are like paper in the flat, so you can always hear people coming and going. She come to the bedroom doorway but couldn't go forward because then she'd be in direct sight of the window. I edged my way out of the kitchen, keeping flat against the wall, eventually sinking to the floor, texting her now because we're both close to the door and they can hear us. Another thing you should probably know is that this person must have been buzzing on other flats trying to get in the building, but didn't buzz ours, so I reckon they saw me in the kitchen window. I'm a pretty ordinary looking 120-pound girl. Lying in my kind of army crawl, I saw the silhouette of a tall, broad, bald man. It could only have been a man. He chapped at the letterbox again, but just stood there. Terrified, I mouthed to my friend, "Did you lock the door?" And she said no. The chain wasn't on either. Now or never, I supposed. I crawl as low as I can to the bedroom, crawl to the desk, grab my keys, crawl to the door. It's only about a meter, and frantically shove the keys in and twist it, at the same time as putting the chain on. This is noisy. He obviously noticed. Hitting the letterbox again, trying the handle as desperately as he could. Terrified to stand up, my mate put her head out of the room to see if we were cool and he wasn't there anymore. I'm kind of half stoned, half asleep, and she reckoned just to go back to bed. Something nagged me though really bad. Remember how I said we could hear people coming and going really easily? Well, it was eerily quiet and not once did either of us hear the building to the main door open or close. This was someone in the building. We had one person across from us, two above us, two above them. Two of the flats are students, and neighbours across was a 90-year-old woman. There were a couple of short, long-haired, chill guys. Nobody we knew matches the description. I stayed up until I couldn't anymore, texting mates, jamming my room door shut, getting the hockey stick near me. I realised about a month after this that the service button to the front of the main building was actually broken and anybody could come in if they pressed it hard enough. I still think they saw me in the kitchen and decided to try their luck. This could have easily been a complete different story. Make sure you always lock your doors and double check no matter how safe your area is. We literally have no idea to this day who that was or what they wanted. I'm just glad they didn't get in. So over the summer, I was at Oregon Country Fair getting ready to head out to the camp with my boyfriend. We were packing up our car, tent on top of the FJ Cruiser, and I went up to the tent to start throwing out our things to pack up. The metal ladder's slippery and had no tape grip on it, and I was wearing socks. While climbing out of the tent, I fell 7 feet straight onto my head. My boyfriend dropped everything, rushing to me asking if I'm okay. I said I'm fine, just my head hurts. Of course my recollection of this is very blurred. He told me sit down in the car, and I was getting upset that he wasn't letting me get up and help him pack. I guess out of annoyance, I got out of the car and my legs apparently collapsed. He calls the paramedics immediately as I start to slip into complete blackness. I don't remember much else, which is where the real story begins. I'm in the ambulance and I can hear sirens. I feel oxygen in my nose. I hear the EMTs yelling my name, but I can't reply, open my eyes or move. Every second I slip deeper and deeper into what I can only explain as darkness. It sounds silly, but this feeling and sensation is indescribable, unlike anything else I've ever experienced in my life. The EMT is helping me, starting to push incredibly hard with his fingers into my sternum, which brings me back. Each press causes pain. I open my eyes and I hear the EMT say, "Only responds to painful stimuli," and then I was out again. The next thing I remember is feeling my clothes being cut off me when I get to hospital. I apparently then started to have seizures and convulsions due to lack of oxygen to my brain as I go further and further away from the world. They had to insert a ventilator into me because I was struggling to breathe. My boyfriend was obviously in shambles. The doctors actually said to him that they're not sure if I'm going to have permanent brain damage or not. Now, when entering the ICU, I remembered being stranded in the blackness, floating and wandering, waiting. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, what I was doing in the first place. I have no idea what's happening. I saw nothing and felt nothing. I was nothing. I didn't know who I was, what had happened, or where the hell I was. I remembered it feeling like floating through endless space, but the thing is, there was an overwhelming sense of calmness through this, so I wasn't scared. After almost 24 hours, I start slowly coming back and break consciousness at certain moments of my coma. Eventually, the most beautiful thing happened. I won't forget it for the rest of my life. My boyfriend was finally let into the ICU to see me after all this madness that was happening. Thinking I was completely gone, he says to a nurse if he can hold my hand, and she says, "Yeah, be careful because you don't want to move too much because of the tubes in her throat." At that moment, when he's approaching, I slowly start to open my eyes. I remember wondering, I think it's purgatory. All I could think about was my boyfriend. I didn't know who Aaron was, or what Aaron was, but the idea of him gave me some warmth. A reason to find my place back. Aaron told me before I had slightly opened my eyes, I start to reach out for him while my eyes are closed. He holds my hand and then my eyes opened slightly and I eventually came back. Obviously I'm fine now and exit whatever place I was in. I've always thought that it's weird when you die, and I've heard there's traces of DMT found in your brain. Now, this is nothing like that. There was no sign of that in this place. There were no vibrant and beautiful colours, there's no contact with special or beautiful creatures, and no sense of completion in the next realm. It made me wonder if there's life after death, and if there's really a place that I went to, like purgatory. That's the only way I can describe where I went, really. This happened to me in a group of friends in the fall of 2005. We're really into checking out old abandoned buildings and such. Well, being this is pretty illegal, we often did it at night, so hopefully we don't get caught. One night, we decided to check out this old abandoned high school that I read about online. The school actually partially burned down in 1926. And then another was rebuilt only to suffer a fire in 1955. The school closes its doors after this, and we're super amped to go and check it out, and it's a 2-hour drive away. So we drive up this tiny curvy road up a large hill. The school is against a wooded backdrop and creates an ominous feel. The whole place was just dark and eerie. I snapped a picture of it on my phone, but the picture's awful because of the dark. Strangely, there's all kinds of floating spots and orbs in it. Throughout the night, We're all taking photos on our phones, and some of them have more orbs on it. I even took a disposable camera. Now the night was fairly uneventful. Now we walked through the school and walked the grounds. Nothing jumped out at us, no creaks or moaning, just a creepy vibe. The odd event is when we're standing in the stairwell of the school. I pulled out a cigarette and went to light it with my lighter, and my lighter doesn't work. No big deal. We all smoke and there's 4 of us. My friend took out his lighter to light it for me. It doesn't work either. Probably a coincidence. Both of our other friends take theirs out and they don't work. Now, they worked perfectly fine before this. After we left the place pretty bummed out that nothing happened, my friend goes to light a cigarette and it works perfectly fine. All the rest of us go to do the same, and you know what? They all work fine. I really can't explain what happened there. If I didn't know the backstory to the place, I wouldn't be so scared, but knowing that it's a place that burnt down and we couldn't light our cigarettes terrifies me. I want to tell you about an experience me and my brother shared about 2 years ago. So, we were deciding to go somewhere haunted during the day. There's a cemetery in Santa Cruz we decide to check out. We go in and walk around and find nothing out of the ordinary and decide to leave. The cemetery's on a supposed haunted road that leads off into the woods. The road is said to be haunted by a lady in white that tries to hitchhike into your car. I'd forgotten about that fact until after the day. Okay, so along this road, we're driving down. It leads into a forest area, a couple of miles down from the cemetery, where you can pull into the side of the road and walk along the hiking trail. So we decide to hike this trail because I completely forgot the road was also haunted, so I wasn't even looking for the paranormal. Anyway, we start hiking this trail in the afternoon. 10 minutes into the trail, we stumble along an abandoned train track and barely standing bridge that the train used to use. It looks cool, so we decide to go down the hill right by the bridge that lets you go under the dilapidated bridge. We go under there and just mess around, looking at the cool architecture. After we had our view, we start backing up to the little hill that leads into the trail. When we get to the top, we're a little exhausted because the hill is kinda steep, and you have to use trees around you to climb up. So as we're standing around back on the trail, we both notice something out of the ordinary. We can hear a voice. Now, like a grown man shouting and screaming angrily. When I say angry, I mean mad. Like, murderous. We quiet down, and I can tell the voice is very far away, almost sounding like it was in the mountains around us, sounding more than 500 feet away for sure, and we look at each other like, the hell? We stand around listening for 15 seconds, and the next thing you know, the voice came down the trail from what sounded like hundreds of feet away to being right next to us down the trail. The inhuman speed of the voice come closer to us, and it's very unnatural. I notice the voice coming from down the trail and thinking to myself that it sounds like somebody's about to kill someone out of rage. But the weird thing is that the voice is speaking in what I can only call gibberish. I understood not one word of it. I instantly get this fight or flight feeling in my body because the voice starts getting very loud and closer to us at inhuman speeds. I tell my brother to pick up some huge sticks with me to defend ourselves because even though the voice came out of the middle of nowhere and moved down the trail at lightning speeds, I still had the assumption that it's some kind of crazy person trying to kill someone. We pick up the sticks and run down the trail back to the car. Now here's the weirdest part. As we're running away from this voice that's coming down the other end of the trail, I hear the voice come up behind us in an instant. It sounded like he was no more than 10 feet behind us, chasing us back to the car. I turn around, even though I don't want to because I have to see who the psycho is. As I turn back, I hear the voice right behind me, and I see no one. I tell my brother to run faster because the voice is right behind us, yelling in absolute rage, but I see nobody chasing us. We start picking up the speed, and the craziest thing in my life happened. The voice starts panning around us completely. I hear the man yelling gibberish right behind me, then from my left ear to right. Then, the voice is right in front of us, and it slides to the right hand side of the trail. Within 10 seconds, it's in front of us again. Now we're very creeped out, running the rest of the trail back to the car, and that voice kept following us down the trail. I remembered after hearing the voice panning around us and hearing it reverberate through the trees, I start desperately praying to Jesus Christ to help us get out of there alive. After we make it around halfway down the trail to my car, the voice vanishes. I remembered slowing down exhausted as we talk about what we just heard. I asked my brother if he heard the voice slide in circles, and he did too. At that point, I know I'm not hallucinating or imagining it. He too describes it as somebody yelling like they're about to murder someone. We speed out of there in a heartbeat, and I remembered driving in silence. That's when I remembered that the road is meant to be haunted and not just a cemetery. I've been down that trail alone a few months before this experience and never had anything weird like this happen. It's one of the strangest things I've ever experienced in my entire life. To this day, I've never been back down the road and never plan on it again. Everything I've written down is in absolute truth and not altered. The Santa Cruz area and mountains are known for cults and very dark magic being performed there. So it was in a convention in my city, and I was waiting for 2 friends of mine to arrive. It's not the biggest convention, but nothing was very small to be said. There's a lot of sponsoring, a lot of people, and a lot of loud noises and colours. I'm sitting at the entrance, in a spot where you can't really be seen by anyone. Now, after about 15 or 20 minutes of waiting, I grab a smoke and just chill, thinking it couldn't take any longer for them to arrive. From my left side, 3 men walked towards me, one looking me straight in the eyes. At this point, my alarms were already ringing in my head. I thought that maybe he just wanted to ask me for a cigarette, as I'm never the kind of guy who doesn't share a smoke with strangers. 2 of them were staring directly at me, and one said, "Hey, little girl, you got some change?" said the one next to me. Now I'm a 24-year-old male, but by not growing out any of my facial hair, having long hair, I can be mistaken for the other gender. I was like, "Sorry, I've got nothing on me," which was the truth since I never had any money on me, only card. They then said, "Show me your wallet, I don't believe you," in an aggressive tone. Things are getting real now. I prepare my mind for the worst. I say, "No, sorry, I can't do that. I can spare you a cigarette, but I'm not showing you my wallet." He agreed and said, "Do I have 3 smokes?" I thought for him and his friends. As I was searching my pocket, he pulled out something, slowly getting towards me. Call it lucky, but I turned my head to him and saw a freaking needle which he tried to move towards me slowly. "I'm gonna use this, girl. You're gonna change your mind." I literally jumped up out of the bench, pushing the 2 dudes away from me. Maybe they were surprised that I was able to move so quick, and it made it alright to get away. "No, I'm not doing that," was the last thing I screamed at them as I ran away. I walked to the convention line very quickly. I bump into the security guard and tell him exactly what happened. He looked at me angrily, jumped over the barrier and said, "I'm gonna kill them," before he sprinted away into their direction. This happened to me a year ago, and I still don't know what happened to them.